My husband became a doctor and celebrated by handing me divorce papers in a hospital parking lot, right between the champagne toast and the applause of his colleagues. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't hesitate. He called me dead weight loudly enough for the people around us to laugh. And then I did the one thing he never expected. I signed the papers without saying a single word. And before he even left the campus, I disappeared from his life completely. For the next 3 years, he bragged about cutting me loose. He told people I held him back. That leaving me was the best decision he ever made. What he didn't know was that I meant it when I walked away. He didn't know I had built an entirely new life. A new name. A new rhythm. A new heartbeat in a city where no one knew his version of me. He only understood the truth years later, when he crossed a line he could never uncross. When he abused hospital access. When he searched medical records. When he found hundreds of calls and messages I never answered. That was the moment he realized something he was never prepared to face. The woman he threw away never belonged to him again. My name is Sable Rowan. And this is the story he never thought I would tell. Before I go any further, I want to know you're here with me. Wherever you're listening from, whatever time of day it is, just know that I'm grateful you chose to sit with my story. Sometimes knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. This is where it begins. I was 29 years old, living in a cramped apartment in Savannah, Georgia, carrying nearly a decade of someone else's dreams on my back. That apartment always felt too small, like the walls were holding their breath with me, waiting to see how long I could last. I told myself that exhaustion was temporary, that love would eventually feel lighter, that if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, needed less, then one day everything would finally make sense. Most mornings started before sunrise. I pulled myself out of bed, slipped into worn work boots, and headed to the construction office. I pretended the ache in my shoulders meant progress. That soreness was proof I was building something real. After that, my evenings belonged to the bar downtown. I poured drinks for tourists, smiled through the pain in my feet, and counted tips while my credit cards hovered just below their limit. Falling apart was never an option. On nights when I passed out at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread beneath my forehead, I told myself this was love, that this was what commitment looked like. Sacrifice now, happiness later. And the person I sacrificed everything for was Callum Mercer. I helped lift him through 9 years of medical school, internships, rotations, and board exams. I believed in him with a kind of loyalty that ignored warning signs. I saw who he could be, not who he already was. When he forgot my birthday because of an exam, I forgave him. When he asked me to transfer money so he could network with colleagues, I told myself it was part of his future. When he brushed off my concerns with a distracted kiss, I convinced myself that once he became a doctor, everything would change. But small cracks kept forming in the story I told myself. The nights he stayed out later without explanation. The irritation in his voice when I asked if he'd eaten. The way he always said later whenever I talked about us. 2 days before his graduation, he barely spoke to me at all. He said he was overwhelmed. He said he needed silence. He promised everything would be different after Thursday. I believed him. What I didn't understand was that the different he imagined didn't include me. Graduation day felt like a sunrise I had waited years to see. I took time off work and bought a simple dress from a clearance rack. Something clean. Something hopeful. Something worthy of a beginning. That morning I stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "Today he'll finally thank you." The auditorium buzzed with proud families and waving flowers. I sat in the middle row, camera ready, heart pounding. When Callum walked across the stage and they called his name, I clapped harder than anyone. Even harder than his own mother. I thought we were crossing the finish line together. After the ceremony, he drifted toward his classmates, laughing, raising plastic cups of champagne. I waited by the car, holding my purse so tightly my hands shook. When he finally approached, the air changed. His smile was gone. His eyes were cold. He stopped a few feet away and held out a beige envelope. "Sable," he said calmly, "we need to get this done." Inside were divorce papers. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. The words blurred. My chest felt hollow. Then he said it, rehearsed and steady. He said he needed to cut dead weight if he was going to move up quickly. That he couldn't carry me anymore. That it was time for him to start fresh. Dead weight. His colleagues pretended not to stare, but I saw the smirks. I heard someone say, "Good for you." And in that parking lot, surrounded by celebration and laughter, something inside me went completely still. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I took the pen he offered and signed my name. The silence unsettled him more than anger ever could. When I handed the papers back, confusion flickered across his face. I turned away and walked toward the edge of the lot with a clarity that frightened even me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my life began to change. That night, when I walked back into the apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't the quiet of two exhausted people sharing space without words. It was the kind of silence that feels final, like a door closing somewhere deep inside your chest. I stood in the middle of the living room and looked around. The couch I'd bought secondhand, the dishes I washed every night, the stack of bills lined neatly on the counter. And suddenly I saw the truth with a clarity I should have had years earlier. This place had never been mine. The only proof I existed there were utility bills with my name printed across the top. Everything else belonged to a life I built for someone who never planned to keep me in it. I opened my laptop without thinking and clicked into a folder I hadn't touched in months. Bank statements, credit card records, tuition payments, rent receipts. Something in me already knew what I was about to see. When the numbers loaded, my throat tightened. Every rent payment for the last 2 years came from my account. Every grocery run, every tuition balance, every temporary expense that became permanent. Callum hadn't contributed a single consistent dollar. I stared at the screen waiting for grief to hit me, but it didn't. What I felt was something cleaner, sharper, resolve. I stood up, walked into the bedroom and pulled out the first suitcase I could find. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I started separating my life into what belonged to me and what never truly had. My clothes, my books, my grandmother's ring. Everything else stayed exactly where it was. I left the jackets he liked, the watch I bought him during his first rotation, the framed anatomy chart he insisted we hang. They were anchors to a life I no longer owed him. While packing, I opened the file cabinet and froze. The lease agreement sat on top. My name. Only my name. Callum had never added himself. The apartment existed solely because of me. Something clicked into place. This wasn't just an ending. It was leverage. I opened my banking app and removed him from every shared access point. I transferred every cent from the joint account into a new personal account he knew nothing about. I canceled the credit card he'd been using under my name. Then I logged into the utility accounts and scheduled them all to shut off before dawn. Electricity, water, internet. By 2 a.m., the apartment glowed only from the kitchen light. I walked to the table, took the house key off my ring, and set it beside a note written in steady ink. "You'll have to take care of the future you wanted." I locked the door behind me without looking back. I drove through the night. The highway blurred into lines of light and shadow. By sunrise, I reached Atlanta and bought a one-way ticket to Boulder, Colorado. I didn't know anyone there. I didn't have a plan. But being unknown felt safer than being remembered by the man who had dismissed nearly a decade of my life as disposable. Somewhere over Tennessee, staring at the clouds beneath the plane, I whispered, "If you think I'm gone, wait. I'll disappear like I was never here." I didn't know then that those 72 hours would haunt Callum for the next 3 years. Boulder softened me in ways Savannah never could. Maybe it was the mountains cutting into the sky like something ancient and steady. Or maybe it was the simple fact that my life finally belonged to me. My studio apartment was barely big enough for a bed and a desk, but every corner felt earned. Every breath felt lighter. I found work faster than I expected as an assistant project manager at a construction firm. No one there saw me as someone's support system. They saw me as capable. That alone healed something inside me. I rebuilt myself quietly. Early mornings, clear air, long hikes that left my legs burning and my mind calm. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped shrinking. And for a while I believed I had outrun everything. Until the email arrived. No subject line. No sender name. Just 2 words. "Where are you?" My stomach dropped. I deleted it without responding, but the chill lingered long after the screen went dark. A few days later, I overheard hikers whispering about a strange man at the trailhead. Pale. Wearing a medical mask. holding up a photo of a woman. My name wasn't spoken, but something inside me tightened. I told myself it couldn't be him, that he wouldn't care enough to look. That lie didn't last long. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that people wander, that mountains attract strange stories, that fear can invent patterns where none exist. But then my phone started lighting up. 27 missed calls. All from unfamiliar numbers. All from Florida. I blocked them one by one and switched my phone to silent, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. It followed me into grocery stores, into the climbing gym, into the quiet moments before sleep when your mind fills in the spaces you try not to look at. A few evenings later, after a long class at the climbing center, I overheard Jensen talking near the equipment lockers. His voice was low, uneasy. "Some guy came by last week," he said to another instructor, asking if a woman named Sable worked here. Looked unsettled. My chest tightened. I hadn't told Jensen my story. I hadn't told anyone. Hearing my name spoken by strangers felt like someone cracking the foundation of the life I'd built brick by brick. By the end of that week, it escalated. When I walked out to the parking lot after work, a single white sheet of paper was tucked beneath my windshield wiper. No writing. No markings. Just blank. It was nothing. And it was everything. The message wasn't on the paper. It was in the silence. The implication. Someone had stood close enough to my car to leave it there. 3 years after I disappeared, Callum had found the edges of my life. The confirmation came through an official email. Boulder Valley Medical Center notified me of an unauthorized access attempt on my patient file. The system flagged it because the login came from a hospital network in Florida. Callum's hospital. My hands went cold. He hadn't just searched for me online. He had used his credentials. He had abused medical access to track me. The violation felt deeply personal, like he'd reached through the life I built and placed his hand back where it didn't belong. And then I saw him. I was leaving the climbing center with Jensen, laughing about nothing when my breath caught. Under the awning, half-shadowed, stood a man I knew by posture before I recognized his face. Callum looked smaller, thinner. His clothes hung wrong, like he'd been living out of a suitcase. His eyes locked onto me with something between desperation and obsession. Jensen instinctively stepped forward. I grabbed his arm and pulled him back. I didn't speak. I didn't move closer. I walked past Callum without a word. That silence hit him harder than anything I could have said. That night sleep didn't come. I lay awake listening to the building settle, to footsteps in the hallway, to every imagined sound outside my door. The next morning I found a paper cup sitting neatly in front of my apartment. Oat milk latte. 1 pump of vanilla. Light foam. Only one person in the world knew that order. I didn't drink it. I didn't touch it. I stood there staring until the reality settled in. This wasn't regret. This wasn't love. This was control. Things moved quickly after that. Someone claiming to be a family member showed up at my office, insisting it was a medical emergency. Security escorted him out before I had to see his face. Later that week, Jensen spotted a man lingering near my building, half hidden behind hedges. When Jensen confronted him, the man fled. I had no choice left. I told Jensen everything. The 9 years. The graduation parking lot. The papers. The disappearance. The months of silence that followed. Jensen listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from disbelief to quiet anger. Once the truth was out, Callum changed tactics. Handwritten letters appeared in the lobby. Pages filled with apologies. Claims of exhaustion. Stories about hitting rock bottom. But beneath the words there was something hollow. He didn't want me back. He wanted me to repair what he'd broken. The breaking point came at a Home Depot parking lot. I was loading supplies into my car when Callum stepped directly into my path. He looked unrecognizable. Sunken cheeks. Shaking hands. A man unraveling in public. He said he loved me. He said he wanted to start over. I looked at him and felt nothing but clarity. "You called me dead weight," I said quietly. "I only did what you asked. I disappeared." His knees buckled. He collapsed right there on the pavement, pleading. Strangers slowed their cars. Someone asked if he was okay. I didn't move toward him. I got into my car. I locked the door. And I drove away. That moment burned something into me. This wasn't a story that ended with distance alone. It was time to stop running. After the Home Depot parking lot, fear stopped being abstract. It became routine. I changed my route to work, checked my windows before bed, stopped wearing headphones outside. Even with Jensen beside me, steady and present, I knew this was something I had to face fully. Some storms don't pass just because you hope they will. A few days later, my company's receptionist interrupted a morning meeting. She said a man had called repeatedly, insisting I was in psychological distress and needed immediate help. He spoke calmly, confidently, as if he knew me better than I knew myself. Less than 2 hours after that call, security radioed in. An unauthorized person was attempting to enter the staff-only zone. When I stepped outside, I saw him. Callum stood near the gate, wearing scrubs, holding himself like the authority he believed still protected him. He looked brittle now, like something cracked and poorly repaired. "I need to talk to you," he said. "I'm losing everything." I kept my distance. "Whatever you're losing," I told him, "isn't my responsibility." He blamed residency, stress, expectations, everyone but himself. Then he said the truth without realizing it. "You're the only person who ever made my life function." That was it. In that moment, every remaining illusion dissolved. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a caretaker. Someone to carry him again. He reached into his pocket and handed me a folded paper. My medical records. Lab results. Prescriptions. Information he should never have had. "I was afraid of losing you," he said, like that explained anything. Security arrived before I could respond. They escorted him away as he shouted my name, insisting he was my husband, that they didn't understand. Just before disappearing behind the equipment shed, he turned back and said something that chilled me more than any threat. "If I found you once, I can find you again." That wasn't love speaking. That was obsession. I didn't wait. I went straight to the legal department and filed for a restraining order. My hands were steady as I filled out the forms, just as steady as they had been when I signed the divorce papers years earlier. This wasn't panic. It was certainty. 3 days later, the temporary order was granted. Holding it felt strange. Thin paper. Heavy meaning. That afternoon, security called again. A man claiming to be a resident from Florida was waiting in the lobby with urgent medical information. I walked out slowly. Callum sat hunched in a plastic chair, smaller than I remembered. I approached, placed an envelope in his hands and stepped back. "You don't have access to me anymore," I said. "This is the last conversation we will ever have." He said he loved me. What I felt was clarity. "All I have left are memories," I told him. "And any feeling I had ended the moment you called me dead weight." I told him I knew about the medical access, that consequences would follow. Investigations. Reviews. Possibly the end of the career he had traded me for. His shoulders collapsed inward. "I don't have anyone," he whispered. For the first time, I told him the truth I'd been carrying for years. "Leaving wasn't revenge," I said. "It was survival." I handed him a second envelope. My final letter. In it, I wrote that I forgave him so I could move forward, not so we could ever go back. He read a few lines and said he wished he'd never met me. "I wish I had met myself sooner," I replied. Security guided him out. This time he didn't resist. 6 months later, a letter arrived from a treatment center in Florida. Callum wrote that he was in therapy, that he was trying to rebuild. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for me. It was the first honest thing he'd ever done. With the restraining order made permanent, the weight lifted quietly. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Jensen and I moved into a small house on the outskirts of Boulder. Quiet mornings. Tall grass. Space to breathe. Looking back, I realized something important. The story didn't start the day he left me. It started the day I stopped leaving myself behind. Some people don't diminish you because they hate you. They do it because they need to feel taller. Walking away isn't cruelty. It's clarity. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like endurance was mistaken for love, I hope you hear this. Leaving isn't failure. It's reclaiming yourself. Thank you for listening.